This video is about tables and what you have to do with those tables in terms of GCSE Science. Now, most people find tables pretty easy, but there are rules you have to use, and you don't want to lose marks by not carrying those out, and it's quite easy to slip up as you do that. The first thing I want to look at is why we do tables in the first place. Now, a scientific experiment, a write-up, will have usually all three of these elements. It'll have some writing, it'll have some prose, it'll definitely have that. It's almost certain to have tables of results, and it'll have graphs or charts of some sort. And each of those things serves a different purpose. The writing, the purpose of that is that it's description. It describes things like the method, like the conclusions, things like that. That has to be done in terms of words. You could describe data in words, but it makes it not very easy to see in amongst all those words. So we have tables. So the tables is a way of presenting data, and the purpose of the table is to do two things with the data. First of all, it needs to make the data clear, and secondly, in order to make it clear really, it needs to make the data organised. It's possible that you might see a trend in a table, but that's really what graphs are about. They're about trends. They're also a way of showing data, but they show trends or patterns. And so the thing of the table is, if it's supposed to make the data more clear than prose, what you don't want to do is to have to look back at the prose in order to find out what the table means. So if the headings don't show you exactly what the table is about, what the experiment's about, and you have to look back to the method to find out, then that table's not doing its job. Now, what we've got here is a table from a scientific paper, and it shows you how tables are done by the scientific community. Now, there are various rules for tables which I'll come to in a minute, but there's one or two things I just want you to notice about this. First of all, it's got three levels of headings up here. Because it's got to show, it's quite clear what it is showing. First of all, it is the temperature and the relative humidity in 2 years, 2008 and 2009, across the whole of a year from January through to December, and it's recording the minimum and maximum in each case. So you need these three levels of headings. They're sometimes called overarching headings, in order to make that clear, and you should always bear that in mind. You don't necessarily need one row for headings, you may need two, you may need three. The other thing I want to point out for the moment here is that every single number in this table is expressed to 2 decimal places. Now if you look over here, you've got 37.00, and you might think, well, I don't really need 0.00, I could just call it 37. And you've also got here 27.30, where you think, well, why can't that be 27.3? Well, that's a convention in science, and it's a convention that you have to stick to. When you have got a set of data, then that data should all be expressed to exactly the same level of precision. So in this particular case, the scientists writing this paper have decided that they're going to express the results to 2 decimal points, and so therefore when you get 37, you don't call it 37, you call it 37.00, so it's still at 2 decimal points. So alright, there are these rules for tables. What are these rules? Now, they're here, and I suspect you probably know certainly 2, maybe 3, I'm not so sure about the last one. A table must have clear headings. A table must have units, otherwise it's pretty meaningless. I mean, there are some quantities that don't require units, but if the quantities have units, they've got to be there, and they ought to be in the headings. The data has to be expressed to an appropriate level of precision and also a consistent level of precision, which is what I've just shown you in the last slide. The data that's most important to compare should be in columns and not rows. Now let me just show you what that means. Now psychologists say that if you are looking, if you're following trends, that it's easier to read from top to bottom than from left to right. So in the top table, first of all, let's just have a look at the table. It's quite clear what it is. You've got three different species of lichen, and you've got 4 different levels of pollution, and you're comparing numbers of each of the lichens at the different levels of pollution. Now, the top table is constructed in a way that is designed to allow you to compare what happens to each of those 3 species in different levels of pollution. So if we look at the Lecanora dispersa, for example, we can see that actually it doesn't do very well at low levels of pollution. You don't find it where there's no pollution at all, and as the pollution goes up, so the Lecanora dispersa becomes more common. So you're looking down the column to compare, and you can do the same for the other 2 species. The other one down below is if you were looking at something slightly different, because you might not be that bothered about what happens to the individual species. What you might want to know is, how can I tell at different levels of pollution what sort of distribution of species would I expect? So in this case, if you're looking at low levels of pollution, for instance, then you can see there that actually you find all 3 of those species. You get a little bit less of Lecanora dispersa than the other 2, but you get all 3. Whereas where there is no pollution at all, you get nearly all of this Dagelia plumbea, not a little bit of Avernia prunastri, and hardly any of the Lecanora dispersa. So neither of these tables is right or wrong. It depends on the circumstances. They're both acceptable. The top one is a better way of doing it if you want to look at the effect of individual species. The bottom one is a better way of doing it if you want to look at different levels of pollution. Now, this is not at GCSE level, this is not crucial. If you get the rows and columns in a way round that is not ideal, you're not going to lose marks, but it does help to make your data more clear, and it's the way that scientists do it. Okay, this table that I showed you before, it obeys all the rules. We've already looked at the headings are absolutely clear. There's no doubt about what is meant by the headings. There are units which are in the headings. You can see that if you had to put degrees C in all of the data in the tables, that things would soon get pretty clogged up. All of the data is expressed to the same level of precision, to 2 decimal places, and because the main thing that you want to do is look at effects through the year, you've got the January, February, March goes down a column, not along a row. So that one obeys all the rules. Now let's have a look at a student's table. Now, if you have a look at this table, it actually it's not very good. It may appear okay, but it actually breaks or twists a number of the rules. First of all, we need to have a look at it and say, can I tell what this is about? Well, I can tell something about what it's about. I know that this student has tried out different temperatures and appears to be collecting a particular gas, and they're collecting it to see how many cubic centimetres they've got it in 3 minutes. Now, the only thing about that is why not say what the gas is? I believe in this case it was actually carbon dioxide, but it's just as easy to write carbon dioxide or CO2 as gas, and so that would improve the clarity. The other thing is what's going on here. What does 1, 2 and 3 mean? Now, alright, we can use common sense. I know what 1, 2 and 3 means. It's going to be that they're 3 repeats, or 3 trials. I can work that out, I can be certain about that, because if I look at the averages, it's quite clear that the 3 figures in the row have been averaged, that those are the 3 repeats. However, I've got to work that out for myself, so the table's not doing its job. What this table ought to have is another heading here with trial number there, or they could put, instead of 1, 2 and 3, trial 1, trial 2, trial 3. That would be alright too. So the headings are not clear. They're not completely unclear, but they're not clear. Secondly, they've got units, but the units are a bit weird, and this is slightly unfortunate because this student has used this slash, which in terms of science means per. So that this heading here actually, if you look at it from a science point of view, means the volume of gas produced in 3 minutes per cubic centimetre, which is meaningless. And what they should have done is not used slashes but used brackets. Right? That's an unusual feature. I don't think many people are going to do that, but it's just a question of being careful. And then we got the level of precision. Now the level of precision is okay in the main data, the raw data. You've got everything expressed to whole numbers, but then when you average those numbers, you've got one decimal place, except for this one here, which presumably is 6.0, but is actually just expressed as 6. Now that could well be penalised. That if you're going to use one decimal place, then these ones over here ought to have one decimal place as well. They ought to be 2.0, 1.0, whatever. If you're not going to do that, then the average should be to the nearest whole number. Now, in this particular case, common sense would probably be that you had one decimal place because you'd get rounding errors for the average, but you've got to be consistent. Now, the rate of reaction is a calculation from the average. It's not the same as the other data. So although good practice would mean that it would be expressed to one decimal point as well, it's not absolutely vital. But what is vital is, if you look here, is that you've got all sorts of different levels of precision. You've got one level of decimal one decimal place here, you've got nothing there, which ought to be 2.0, and then you come down here and you've got 2 decimal places. So they're not consistent, and again, a decision needs to be made. Probably 1 decimal place is the best thing to use, or 2. It would still be alright. It doesn't have to be the same as on the left hand side, but what it does have to be is the same throughout that column. So if you take a quick glance at that, that's a relatively simple table, and it should be pretty easy to do it perfectly. But this particular student has made a number of mistakes, and up to a point, it may be because they don't know about the rules, it may be because of carelessness, but they run the risk of losing marks for a task that is really pretty easy. So whether it's rules or conventions, you've got to stick by them, and just get into the habit of always doing that, and you should have no problems.